Good morning. It's Dr. Brad, your health reclaimed, where we go through root issues that cause all kinds of health problems. Today, we're going to be talking about mental health. And it's always interesting, our ideas on all of these things we experience. So much of the time, we're so far off track of what's really going on. And we really need somebody with a whole different set of eyes and ears and a thinking cap to pull us out of that. That's definitely the case with who we're going to talk to today. This is Brian Sachetta. So, Brian, why don't you welcome, introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Brad. So I'm Brian Sachetta, owner and author of Get Out of Your Head, which is both a brand and a book series that helps folks overcome anxiety and depression.
That's uh, that's an interesting title. Get out of your head. We were just talking about some of my head experiences are a little wild for a lot of people, but I've always lived on the edge, and that's interesting. What's drove you to this concept of getting out of your head?
Yeah, good question. So I guess the real driver of me starting that brand, coming up with that term or phrase or whatever, was just my own personal experiences. Yeah, I struggled pretty hard with anxiety starting. I can't exactly say the precise age, but somewhere, starting in high school, and then it really started to rear its ugly head at the end of high school and the beginning of college. So I started having panic attacks, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't know how to handle them, that sort of thing. And so I can obviously tell some of my tales along that journey, but where Get Out of Your Head comes from is over the course of that journey, I got to the point of realizing that what I was doing in my mind, the wheels that I was spinning, the different patterns that I was running mentally, were creating and or perpetuating a lot of my anxiety and therefore a lot of my suffering. And so for me, it kind of became a personal mantra to say, you're doing that thing again, man. You are creating some of the anxiety or you are perpetuating some of it. And so if you can get out of your head, you're going to mitigate that to a degree. Now, obviously, when you dive
Interesting.
deep into a subject, there's all sorts of nooks and crannies and corner cases and that sort of thing. So it's not always the simplest thing, right? I
Right.
guess it's not always as simple as it sounds. But by and large, right, the less we live in our heads, then probably the less suffering and anxiety and possibly even depression we're going to experience.
So that raises a couple questions. I grew up, I had chronic illness very young age, and it changes your perspective on how you live. So when you look at things like, um, looks like I lost you. Are you still there?
I'm still here. Did I lose you?
Okay. The recording, it just kind of faded and everything. Commonly with anxiety, things like that around the time that I started, that's around puberty, something like that. You got a lot of hormones changing, and a lot of the anxiety has to do with lifestyle issues. What was your home life like back then?
My home life was pretty normal, honestly, and I think that was one thing that was tricky to me was lived a pretty good life, had a pretty good childhood. I have two loving parents, a brother. I look back and I think to myself, like, it's not like things were perfect. We weren't, that expressive with our emotions. We didn't always talk about things all the time, but it was a good childhood, and the home life was pretty good. It was more, I kind of look back and I think to myself, sure, could I have, if I was in a different environment where we knew more about mental health and we talked more about these things, could that have been more beneficial? Absolutely. At the same time, I think the core thing was that, my tendency, right? I kind of like, I guess I would say, like, maybe genetically speaking, right? Some of the mental health stuff runs in my family. And so, what that can mean is you're almost predisposed to certain ways of thinking and feeling. And that might even be, when they say that anxiety or depression can be sort of like a chemical imbalance in the brain or the body is maybe, right, maybe my genes make it such that like I'm not able to create the right neurotransmitters that lead to the right kind of mental health or the right kind of thinking and all that sort of thing.
Something I've always thought was interesting, when you bring that up, is people think a lot of stuff's genetic. Have you ever heard of the study of epigenetics?
Yeah, epigenetics is fascinating, right? So they say that genetics loads the gun and epigenetics pulled the trigger, or lifestyle pulls the trigger, which essentially sets the stage for the epigenome, which is which of those genes turn on or off.
Right. There's 30,000 different potential expressions for every gene we got. And lifestyle determines which one of those happens. Generally, when you see patterns like that through history, if you understand how to go through history, you'll see lifestyle issues that set that stage. Diet's a huge part of that, really huge part of that. People don't have a measuring rod on how healthy their diet is because they don't understand enough about it. The amount of people I've worked with, we've been helping people for pretty close to 40 years now. Um, the amount of people think they have a healthy diet and actually are is almost none. It's almost zip, and that really sets the stage. The There's a hormonal thing that always goes on to set anxiety, and that's when adrenals burn out. There's something with cortisol and adrenaline that sets the stage for all that. And one of the biggest things in history is, okay, what in a family like sets that stage? Gut health is top of the list, absolutely top of the list. So, and it's interesting because this symptom shows up in the head, but what the root issue causes, it's usually way downstream where people don't look.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. One thing that I kind of want to say here, right, is like with my own journey, and I think for a lot of people in general, is you start by saying, hey, I have XYZ problem, and maybe I'm talking to my doctor about it, or I'm reading up on just the very normal and accepted narratives in the medical industry, right? And very
Uh-huh.
quickly, you're like, I'm trying these things that my doctor's telling me to do. It's not really working. I'm eating this diet that or even you're like, I don't even think about my diet. And then you uncover some piece of information where you're like, wait a second, diet could actually be important in regard to mental health. And then you're going down some rabbit hole that, I have found helpful for myself. And I think a lot of folks do as well. But it's fascinating. It's also frustrating because I have read a lot of research around nutrition and I have educated myself to a decent degree around nutrition. And then I'll go talk to medical professionals and they'll be like, that's made up. That's not real, whatever. And so there's still not a consensus, at least within the medical community, around how all of these things come together and then affect our mental health. But one
Okay.
thing that is quite fascinating is, so there's a doctor, his name's Chris Palmer. He did a lot of work out of McLean Hospital, which is near me in Boston. And his book is called, I believe it's called Brain Energy. His theory is that all psychological disorders are actually mitochondrial disorders, aka metabolic disorders, which means that your cells cannot take food, it can't take the food that you're eating and effectively convert it into energy, right? So it can't create ATP through the electron transport chain in your cells. And so he's saying that if you look at a lot of these different diseases, let's take anxiety and depression, right? They are most of the time, or a lot of the time, they are comorbid, which means that people who experience anxiety tend to experience depression much more often than the regular population, folks who don't experience anxiety, and then vice versa. So folks who experience depression tend to experience anxiety a lot more often and more frequently than folks in the general population who have never experienced depression. And so he's like, what he says is essentially you get to this point where you see that, with diagnoses, there's no real thing that we can point to and say, this is the problem, right? As in, like, you have some gene that's turned off and that turned on and that needs to get turned off. Essentially, you get to the point where you look and you see that all of these conditions tend to share some common pathway. And he's like,
Right.
if you look at, and I'm really just regurgitating his book. This is not my science. He basically says that if you look for that common pathway, the common pathway is the brain, and then inside of the brain, the energy in the brain, and then diving further down, it's the cellular energy. And so he's like, why does anxiety become comorbid with depression and maybe comorbid with some other psychological condition? His theory is essentially that we don't have the, for folks who are, fall into that camp of experiencing these conditions, they don't have the ability to synthesize or create energy properly and then distribute that properly throughout the body. And what ends up happening is the brain goes into this state or essentially becomes not quite functional at 100%. And then you start to just see these weird symptoms where you're like, oh, essentially what's happening is the brain can't operate as effectively as it should. And a byproduct of that, or the result of that, is anxiety, is depression, is schizophrenia, is bipolar.
Okay.
And so
let me throw a
fascinating.
couple of physiological realities in there.
Yeah.
And it really gets the mind going. And I think dialoguing around clinical things, I think it's a fascinating conversation when you have different minds looking at things from different perspectives with different backgrounds, because you can come up with some stuff that is really, really thought-provoking and oftentimes real keys to things. The brain's 60% water, just as a standard issue. 1% dehydration gives you all the signs of dementia. Most people don't realize that. So just a little bit of reduction in the fluids will give you signs of dementia. Your adrenals control your kidneys. And when adrenals are wide open, your bladder is constantly getting full and you're always running to the bathroom to empty it. So that's one issue. The adrenals control the blood sugar. And when the adrenals are wide open, they're always raising the sugars, but not in what they measure. There's a different way to measure them. And it's pretty common with people with adrenal issues. Their sugars are 3 to 5 times what they should be, but not glucose. It's other sugars, and that's through ketosis type of pathways. When the body shifts to ketosis, burning more fat because there's no stores left in it, the function of the cells is reduced to 75% max of what it's supposed to do. So you take all these things with adrenal that threw out there in the first place. You got dysregulation of blood sugars. You have dehydration. You have ketotic issues because the adrenals keep making the blood sugar go up like this, and insulin drives it in tissues. And when it stays down too much, then you start to liberate fast and it creates that ketotic issue. So you have 75% max with the dehydration issue that creates all the signs of dementia and an inability to process with the energy that's available right there. And there you got what he's talking about from a mechanism standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something else to bring in, right, is so when you think about anxiety and you think about the fear response in the body, so what will happen is, the brain detects a threat, and that is picked up by the limbic system, and specifically inside the limbic system, it's the amygdala. And then the amygdala sends a message to the hypothalamus, which is part of the HPA axis.
Mm-hmm.
And the last part of the HPA axis is the adrenals, right? So if your adrenals aren't working well, they're secreting all sorts of stress hormones and keeping you in this fight or flight state. And so when you say, right, you're dehydrated or you're in ketosis or whatever it is, if you're not in that right state and you're dysregulated, that dysregulation may manifest as fear and anxiety. And so that's just another example of why it's so important, right, to eat the right foods and to make sure that we're hydrated. Otherwise, we may feel like we're dying when, who knows, maybe we need a glass of water, maybe we need some vitamins, whatever it may be.
Yeah, one other thing the adrenals do, they control a bunch of things in the body. But one of the other things they do is they make all the precursors to sexual hormones. Pregnenolone and DHEA are made in the adrenals, and those are precursors to the sexual hormones. Those get converted into progesterone first. Progesterone converts to testosterone to estrogen, both men and women, just at different rates. So when the adrenals are going wide open, all the pregnant and DHA gets shunted over to make cortisol and adrenaline. There's nothing to make the sexual hormones. It's testosterone that gives a man his emotional stability. It's progesterone that gives a woman her emotional stability. Rip that out, and what happens?
No stability.
Yeah, there you got mania. And it's really, really a simple issue, which it's all processed up here in the head, but the responses are distant, creating this perfect storm for all this scenario going on, which is just phenomenal when you look at it from these different perspectives.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. One thing that is on a similar pathway here is, so I think it was probably like 2 years ago now. One of my friends was going through some health issues, and he was working with a PhD scientist, and the PhD scientist was like, go through this protocol, take these supplements, but also log every last piece of food that you eat in this app called Chronometer. And so I started using that app, and just by using the app, you get something of an education in nutrition, right? Because I'd say for most folks, nutrition is fat and carbohydrates and sugar, like the macros, right? Really, like nutrition is sort of the smaller stuff, the micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, that kind of thing, right? And so when you start logging your food, you very quickly figure out, one, that you may eat in patterns, and two, that those patterns tend to lead you to specific deficiencies on a regular basis. Now, obviously, if you take a multivitamin or something similar, you might be able to get enough of those things that you're deficient in, but who knows what the multivitamin is made out of? For example, right, there is all the different B vitamins. So B9 is folate, and a lot of people are actually deficient in folate, and some people have this gene called the MTHFR gene. Some people will expand that out in a joke form and say the mother blanker gene. And when you have a mutation in the MTHFR gene, it's harder for you to synthesize folate. And so I guess going off of two things, right? So a lot of us, our diets are deficient in folate, or they used to be for sure. And then on top of that, like not everybody's body is that efficient in synthesizing folate, even if you did eat enough of it. So the government actually, if you look at most packaged foods, breads, cookies, chips, crackers, that sort of thing, when there is flour in a packaged food product, it's actually enriched with folic acid. And so what that is it's a way for the FDA, the government, whatever, to make sure that people are getting enough folate, because if they don't, it can lead to birth defects and that sort of thing, which is obviously not good. But the challenge with that is some people also can't process folic acid because it's a synthetic version of folate. And so
there's a reason why that is generally not talked about. All of the added stuff in the food comes out of chemical factories. In nature, all organic molecules only have a left twist to them. And all double bonds in all organic molecules have what's called a cis form. They come in from one side, they go across the double bond, they go out the same side. It takes a lot of energy to make that. In a chemical factory, it's easier to make the transform. So if you have the same molecule, but it's done in a right twist instead of left, no biological activity. If you have a transform instead of a cis, no biological activity. The quality of vitamin has everything to do with everything. And since like COVID happened and the supply chain disruption from the COVID, most of the highest quality supplements you get in North America no longer have any clinical value. I'm one of the few people who can test those and prove that out. And I'm known throughout the industry by people in the industry that's something. I'm one of 300,000 docs who can figure that out.
Wow.
So it takes a lot to know that. So I've tracked the changes in what's gone on. A lot of supplement isn't any good. And when you throw folate at somebody who can't convert that into 5 minutes, it does them no good. So you have all of these things that are like a carrot on a stick that they give people. And these are pacifiers that cannot possibly give people the very thing that they're looking for.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And I don't know all that much about, like, I'm kind of saying all that I know, during this
Hmm.
conversation.
You know a
But
lot,
even
and
that
it's good.
amount is scary to think about, right? In the sense that you look at it, and one way of thinking about the standard American diet is they took out everything that we needed from it. They basically make it so that the average person is eating 50+% complete crap, ultra processed garbage. And then they're like, hey, we took out all the stuff that you needed, the vitamin A, the vitamin C, the vitamin, B9 and B3 and B1, whatever. And so, to compensate for that, we're going to add those vitamins back in, but we're going to add in synthetic versions. And so, we're sitting here thinking, oh, look at this. Like, this food tastes good. We enjoy it, whatever. And it's enriched with all the vitamins that I need. And then when you go and, do a little bit of research, you're like, "Who? Not so fast. This might be the source of some of our problems."
As Dr. Brad, I'm going to jump in. We're going to put this one into 3 sections. Actually, it's been an extremely dynamic talk, and it got quite long because it was such a good talk, and we really need to break this up, and I don't want to extend this too far. So I'm going to cut this into 3 sections. We're going to drop this right now. We'll continue this in the next section. So we'll see you there.